Nigel and Fiona had been married for 7 years when they decided to take a cruise to India. On the ship, Nigel went to the bar one evening. As he stepped inside, he saw a woman dancing. It was Mimi. Nigel couldn't take his eyes off her. She noticed him but acted cold, saying just a few casual words before walking away. Nigel stepped outside to feel the sea breeze. A man interrupted him. It was Oscar, Mimi's husband, in a wheelchair. Oscar asked Nigel to help him back to his room. Nigel agreed and carried Oscar there. Inside the room, Oscar started telling Nigel about his life with Mimi. They first met on a bus in Paris. Mimi sat in the back, wild and free, catching Oscar's attention instantly. A cashier approached them for tickets. Mimi couldn't find hers, so Oscar secretly slipped her his spare. She took it and wrote him a check to cover it. Oscar told the cashier he hadn't bought a ticket himself and paid a fine instead. The bus pulled away, and Oscar watched Mimi disappear. Back home, he kept working, living off his father's inheritance. He dreamed of being a writer, free to create without worry. Since that bus ride, Mimi's face stayed in his mind. He decided to find her, using the only clue he had, the bus's route number, 96. Oscar waited at the bus stop every day, but she never showed. One night, he went to a restaurant with friends and turned to see Mimi there. She recognized him too, though neither mentioned the bus. After dinner, Oscar wanted to know more about her. He learned her name was Mimi. They met again after her dance class. Nigel stood there watching her, his heart pounding like a piano. Later, they went to a restaurant together. Oscar teased Mimi, and their initial awkwardness faded. Mimi's innocent beauty warmed Oscar's tired heart. She liked his charm and humor. They kept meeting in romantic Paris, where love seemed to bloom everywhere. Soon, Oscar and Mimi's connection grew electric. It felt like their bodies had found their souls. Oscar read his writing to her, and Mimi danced for him. Their love reached heights other couples couldn't touch. They stared into each other's eyes, hungry for one another. The next day, Nigel and Fiona talked about Oscar's story at the ship's restaurant. Fiona looked worn out. Oscar joined them, sitting down to chat. He didn't notice Mimi teasing Nigel across the table. Nigel panicked but tried to stay calm. Nigel went to Oscar's room later, drawn into their strange world. Oscar and Mimi weren't happy with normal games anymore. They played twisted roles instead. Their warped relationship still burned hot, though it was nearing its peak. At a friend's party on the ship, Oscar acted like himself, but Mimi danced with her roommate. Nigel didn't see it at first. The roommate's bold moves pushed Mimi too far. She called a dance partner over and moved with him in the hall, lights dim around them. Oscar finally noticed and checked his watch, leaving abruptly. Back in their room, he watched TV. Mimi stormed in, upset. "Why'd you walk out on me?" she asked. They argued and she apologized, but trust was already slipping away. During this, Nigel stood to leave. Mimi followed him out, hearing Oscar and Fiona laugh behind her. Back in their own cabin, Fiona asked Nigel if Mimi was there earlier. His vague answer didn't match her suspicions. Fiona's frustration showed, but Nigel just comforted her with empty words. They stepped outside with their child, the cold sea breeze making Fiona shiver. Nigel went back for his jacket. Mimi appeared suddenly, warning him not to trust Oscar's version of their story. It was twisted. She told Nigel to meet her at midnight and left. Nigel and Fiona argued later on deck. It felt like a war. Nigel told Fiona to go see Oscar herself. She complained, but Nigel's nerves made him unsteady. He went to Oscar's room alone. No one answered, so he pushed the door open. In the dark, he saw Nigel approach the bed and kissed a small hand. The lights flicked on. Oscar laughed. Nigel stood to leave, embarrassed. Oscar teased him, saying he could chase Mimi if he wanted. Oscar was fine with Nigel pursuing her, but only if he listened to their full story first. If Nigel could keep his marriage steady, it might work out. Mimi's spirit pulled at him, but she stayed with Oscar. Oscar kept telling Nigel their tale. After trust broke, their love rushed downhill. They filled empty days with soap operas. Oscar met a publisher's editor for dinner, hoping to sell his book. He was excited, but Mimi wore a wild dress to scare off the editor. Oscar's jealousy grew, poisoning him. At the restaurant, Mimi skipped makeup and toyed with the fruit plate. The editor flirted, showing her interest. The mood soured. Oscar's lack of fame didn't help. Mimi spilled 9 cups on purpose, ending the night. Back home, they fought hard. Neither backed down. Oscar suggested breaking up. Mimi packed to leave but apologized instead. Oscar swallowed his anger, letting her stay. The cracks in their bond deepened. Their love, once glue, turned to ash. On the bed, passion faded into cold kisses. Oscar couldn't sleep, trapped like a mouse craving freedom. One quiet night he asked to split again. Mimi didn't get why their fire had died. Oscar's harsh words cut deep, leaving a hole. Days later he lived free, but it didn't last. Mimi returned, broken, begging to stay. Oscar's guilt didn't stir. Instead, he pushed her into a hell of his making, testing her limits. "You're here now, that's all that matters," he said. He promised they'd leave Paris together. They boarded a plane, Oscar clutching his bag. He lied about checking luggage and slipped away. Mimi, lost in hope, didn't see it. The plane took off. She gave up, watching him vanish. Back on the ship, Nigel heard this and doubted it was real. Oscar insisted it wasn't just his imagination. Nigel didn't argue and left the room. Outside he ran into Mimi. She asked him to hear her side. They talked then kissed. Nigel asked when they could be together. Mimi said he'd have to wait for the story's end. Crew members interrupted them, and they parted. Nigel found Fiona in their cabin, her mood icy. They fought. Fiona warned him she'd double down if he stepped out of line. She started vomiting from seasickness. Nigel gave her a pill, but she ranted about their 7-year marriage. Tired of her complaints, he dressed and left. Oscar's story rolled on for Nigel. After leaving Mimi, he flew free like a bird, chasing women to fill his void. One morning, after a bar night, a girl suggested a threesome. Oscar chased her out the door, and a truck hit. He survived with a fractured bone, needing weeks to heal. Mimi appeared then, reuniting after years. They talked, but it wasn't warm. She wanted to leave but confronted him first. Grabbing his hand, she yanked him off the bed. The fall left him paralyzed. Mimi moved back in, caring for him coldly. Oscar sat silent, his rich life now a simple meal. When he apologized, she mocked him. Next day, Mimi wheeled Oscar to a park. She admitted an infection left her barren, blaming him. He took the guilt, knowing he'd hurt her. Mimi wasn't done. She invited a dance troupe to their home for dinner. After, she danced with one man, taunting Oscar. His face twisted in pain, exactly what she wanted. They moved to the bedroom, ignoring him. Oscar's heart died that night. On the ship, Oscar finished the tale for Nigel. He worried who'd fall for him next, knowing Nigel wanted Mimi. Nigel denied it and went to the deck, reeling from the story. In their cabin, Fiona lay unconscious. At a ship party, Nigel drank alone. Oscar sent wine to him and Mimi as they danced. Nigel confessed he loved her, but she called it a fantasy. He felt like a fool. Mimi reminded him of Fiona. Nigel tried to smile at his wife, but her eyes showed disappointment. Fiona joined Mimi in the crowd, bonding over their pain. They hugged, leaving Nigel alone as the ship rocked. He stood, torn between them. Later, Nigel woke hungover, finding Fiona gone. He knocked on Oscar's door. Oscar smirked, gesturing inside. Fiona and Mimi lay together on the bed. Nigel yelling, "Give it up, or someone's getting hurt." She didn't budge. He and Fiona cried, their trip a mess after 7 years. Oscar's greed had ruined his love with Mimi, just as Nigel's choices strained his own marriage. The story ended, a bitter lesson in love's cost.